The Weekly Harvest, an in-depth look at the Brandon Wheat Kings and the WHL.
Boschman trying to come up with it for Allison. Here's Allison right in front. He scores!
Brandon Junior hockey fans, you've waited 2 decades for this. In the league's 50th anniversary, your Wheat Kings are the champions.
Well, our guest this week, episode 26 of the Weekly Harvest podcast, is a voice that is very familiar for Wheat King fans in the past, and his face over time has become more familiar as he went from being just a local radio guy to this big national personality that I know when guys like me and Crowe get started in radio, we hear about guys like this. So it's a joy to have him on the podcast. We got Daren Millard here tonight. Daren, how are you?
Great to be with you guys. You say familiar voice. It's funny because when I worked in Brandon and did the Wheat King games on CKLQ, my parents had this real dilemma. They couldn't tell the difference between Dreger and I, and they had these debates. So it's nice to hear that I'm actually familiar to somebody in Brandon because my own parents couldn't tell my voice compared to the guy I was working with.
When you and Dreger, obviously, you guys were just a couple of young kids getting the start in radio. But
hold on. I thought Dreger was like 65 years old at the time, and he's a couple of years older than me. But that dude was organized and mature and had a head on his shoulders like you would not believe. So while we were young in age, I considered him to be like Peter Mansbridge together.
Well, you guys had to be sitting around probably the 40 or whatever the saloon of choice would have been back then. Did you guys ever think?
Come on, Houston, give me some credit.
Was there any discussion at all of you guys going pro? And I mean, is it weird to look back on that now and think that both of you made it in terms of broadcasting?
No, because we didn't. Did we think about it? No, mainly because he kept us so busy. You didn't have time to think. I will say this. I've never worked more days and more assignments in my career than I did in my couple of years at CKLQ. We were on the go nonstop. Winter was dominated by the Wheat Kings and then the other hockey that we had going on, whether it was the Junior B or the AAA Wheat Kings, the Midget Wheat Kings that had such great runs when we were around, or the curling and the Bonspiel scene, and it was go, and there was so many national championships, and we covered all the provincials on the curling scene as well. So you were going 24/7, and with Dregs on the road, you would still have to do your sportscasts and your roundups. So it was you never really had time to sit back and think about it. And I'll be honest with you, doing the Wheat Kings and doing that beat was like a dream of mine. So being able to be in that bubble was the climax of a kid that was growing up in the East End and was listening to the people that came before me and people like Rick Delabo and then Dean Jago and over at CKX and looking up to them and trying to aspire to be them. And when I got to that stage, I thought I was the top dog, and I loved every minute of it. It was as big time as anything I've done. That feeling of when I got to call Wheat King games and work at Q Country.
What's your first memory, like going back, like of the Wheat Kings, back to when you're a kid? Who's like a first player that sticks out in your mind?
Yeah, that's a good question because when I played, grew up in the East End of Brandon, we didn't play necessarily on the indoors. We played at the old Barn 3 was our minor hockey, or we played at the East End Community Center. And I remember going to Wheat King games and watching the Laurie Boschmans, the Rick Nichols, the Brian Props, Kelly McCrimmon, Brad McCrimmon, that era. And I remember my mom worked at Wolco, and she worked with Laurie Boschman's mom. So Laurie Boschman came to my 7-year-old or 8-year-old hockey game at Barn 3. Must have been after one of their practices, and he popped over with a couple of guys. And that was, it didn't get any better than that. And to this point, 43 years later, I still think of that and how a Wheat King came and watched us play. Now, did he pay any attention to us? Probably not. My mom probably fed us a bunch of stuff, but I do know that that's one of my first memories is watching those guys come and watching us play. And then I remember being at a practice and Dave Chartier broke the glass at a practice one day, and I'll always remember that. I have a Steve Patrick hockey stick somewhere kicking around my house. Somehow I got that. I have a Ray Allison hockey stick that I'm actually going to take to the office next week and slip it into Kelly McCrimmon's office and see if he figures out where it came from. I don't know where I got these sticks, but that's my era, sort of first glimpse of hockey. And I remember being at the Western League final against Portland, and it being so intense and craziness, and that Memorial Cup final. Obviously, losing in overtime to the Peterborough Petes breaks my heart to this day. I still do not like the Peterborough Petes. They have I have a chip on my shoulder about them, and it's funny. I'll wander here on you guys, and I apologize. But we adopted our second daughter, and she has a half brother who's taking in a home in Peterborough, and we go out, and when we lived in Markham, we would go and visit him once every 3 weeks, and just going to Peterborough always made my, even though it was for a great meaning, my daughter spending some time with her brother, it was an awesome moment. It still made my skin crawl a little bit driving into Peterborough and driving past that rink.
If there is random Wheat King apparel or even like souvenirs left around, Krim would have his choice of suspects, with being a number of Wheat King connections in the organization, but I think you would be suspect number one. It's kind of a hard line sometimes to do the broadcaster and not be a homer or a fan, but you've openly made it known that you're a Wheat King fan and your love for the team. And I mean now, and that goes, of course, with Vegas. And you know, Brandon almost is like a mini Vegas in terms of Golden Knight fans here. There's many Golden Knight fans as there is Jet fans. What's that like, trying to be that impartial media guy, but really having a reason to cheer?
Well, now I can cheer. Now I work for the team, so I can root for the Wheat King connections with the Golden Knights, and I don't have a working connection. I don't cover the league anymore. I don't do the Memorial Cup, so I can openly, even though I kind of did anyway, working those tournaments, dropped every Brandon connection I could. But the tournament that was in Brandon, I didn't do, and I wasn't crazy about not doing it. It just happened to be in a time when we shifted our focus more towards the National Hockey League, and I was pulled in that direction. But I did come out to the first game. It was the Taylor Hall game when he got crunched into the boards, and it was sort of bittersweet that I wasn't doing the tournament. But once I got there and realized how distracting it would be, one, so many people that I would be able to connect with and see, and two, it's always been my dream. Like once in my life, I want to see this franchise win the Memorial Cup. We've been close a few times, and that I'll be honest with everybody, that is my ultimate dream. I would love to see the Vegas Golden Knights win the Stanley Cup, and professionally that would be incredible, and I'd be so happy for everybody in my current position. But if I was going to pick one sporting thing to happen, it would be the Brandon Wheat Kings to win the Memorial Cup, and that tournament that Brandon got to host was really cool to be there and see it firsthand and up close. Now we got to the final and things didn't work out our way, but it was pretty neat to see.
I know that I get a lot of flack from there's 21 other Western Hockey League broadcasters, and when they follow along the Weekly Harvest, we've had Dan Duva on, we've had Zach Whitecloud, we've had Kelly McCrimmon. Every time I seem to tweet it out, they always say, "Oh, which Vegas connection's coming on next? You guys sure are milking the Vegas connection." I'm
a Brandon connection.
That's what I said about you.
I'm not a Golden Knight. I mean, I love my job. I have the best job in the National Hockey League when you're working for a team, but I consider myself more Brandon than
you're wearing a Crocus Plains hat. Vegas. Come on now.
I am. It's this we do a golf trip with four of us from high school, And my buddy RJ hosted it last year, and he gave all of us Middle Province sweatshirts from the Middle Province Clothing Company, and or I don't know whether it's the Middle Province Clothing Company, but it's a great clothing line out of Winnipeg, established 1870, and then Crocus Plains hats, because we all came from Crocus, and we all wear it with great pride. It was funny. Speaking of schools, when Zach Whitecloud got called up, I don't know Zach. We're totally different generations, but I went over and mentioned that I was from Brandon. He had no clue, zero clue, and why would he? He's in his own bubble. But I asked him where he went to school, meaning high school, and he brought up River Heights. And this tells you all you need to know as people from the Westman area listening, or Manitoba listening to this podcast. I said, I was in school when River Heights was built, and he just couldn't fathom that. So that's how sort of distant, long ago my history goes back to Brandon.
But you've got obviously a ton of connections in Vegas, and we've touched on this with Dan, with Zach, and with Kelly. But from a broadcast perspective, I mean, Shane Knighty, he played for the Prince Albert Raiders, but he's from Neepawa. Now, Shane
born in Brandon. I always tell him, "You're born in Brandon." He's like, "I was raised in Neepawa." Like, hey, you got your start.
His dad drives my nieces and nephews on the school bus, and his mom was my lunch lady in school.
See?
But it's a small town feel. And then, of course, you've got another Manitoban, and Gary Lawless right there with you helping out on the broadcast.
No. Gary is from Peterborough.
Oh.
He is Manitoban when it fits him, when it suits. And whenever he needs to be Manitoban, he fits that in. But Gary Lawless, let the record show, and my previous opinions on Peterborough are very, very strong, is from Peterborough, Ontario.
Aside from him being from Peterborough and likely a Pete's fan, having that familiarity with some people and some neighborhood type discussions, that had to make a transition for you a lot easier.
Hey, so here's the thing. I knew Gary to bump into him, but didn't really know him because I was long gone to Manitoba by the time he went to Winnipeg, because we missed each other in Winnipeg. And Shane, I probably covered more in junior when he was with PA and Swift and my time in CKLQ and CKX. So working in those areas, but didn't know him that well. So it's been fun getting to know these guys with our respective backgrounds and being able to discuss certain things. Shane being from Neepawa, and we know a lot of the same people from his time in Winnipeg. So we have plenty of connections there, and we still, like, every couple of weeks find another person that we know. The Benji Miles from the old March Drive-In, we just discovered that connection a couple of weeks ago. So there's still little things, but while it was comfortable knowing that they were Manitobans or transplanted Manitobans, I didn't really know them that well before I came here, other than Krim, Kelly.
Now,
By the way, I talked to Kelly way more before I worked for the Golden Knights than I do now. I don't know what it is, and we laugh about it, that we haven't really found a lot of time to sit down and catch up more regularly. But it's weird. We both get caught up in doing our respective jobs, which his is far more important than mine.
How did this whole transition kind of come about? Now, I know that, Chris and I were in the office when, you and Sportsnet, whether, I'm not sure what terminology you want to use, parted ways, went separate ways. You and Sportsnet were no longer together, mutual and coupled, whatever you want to, say. So we all thought, I wonder where he's going. And I remember thinking to myself, man, I wonder if there's a chance he ends up in Vegas. And I think that was the first thought for a lot of us in the Wheat King office and on the broadcast side of things. If you can, kind of talk us through how this all came about, to you ending up as the television host for the Vegas Golden Knights.
I can tell you that it wasn't like my first thought was I was going to hang out with my family, but that's not why I stopped working at Sportsnet. I love my family, and I keep going back to this in different conversations, but I do want to work, and I want to work for a long time. So I was looking around but didn't know really what to do. And it was late in the summer, so there wasn't a lot of opportunity. So I sort of initially just decided I was going to take a year and chill out and do some different things and really decompress a little bit, or as my buddy Nick Kiprio says, decompose. In one of the meetings, I just need a couple of minutes to decompose. We're like, that's not a good idea. Really. You're not going to be good the next segment in that state. But the more I thought about it, and again, reiterate that I really wanted to work and knew it wasn't going to be a long time sitting around. I made connections with people that I knew in the league and in the business. My wife comes from a background of working with a team and was employed by the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Toronto Raptors for a long time. So had that background, and we'd always talked about how it would be really cool to work for a team at some point. So the split end happened with Sportsnet, and then you start leaning on your different relationships, and Vegas was right there because of my assignment to do the expansion draft in 2017 at the NHL Awards here with Catherine Tappan. And when you're doing an event like that, you're backstage, and George McPhee and Bill Foley, the owner, were making the announcements on stage with us. But in between segments, you'd be backstage and you'd be having conversation or creating conversation. Got a funny story about Bernie Perrant, if you'll allow me later on. But so one of those conversations was with my boss right now, Eric Tosi, who's director of communications and is taking over added rules as we speak. So you got to know people, and Eric was with the Boston Bruins before, knew him a bit, but got to spend some time with him in Vegas, and it just we got to know each other a little bit and developed a relationship, and went another year, and luckily it worked out. And because I think it was more because of that assignment and being on the radar and being able to connect with George McPhee and have some FaceTime with Bill Foley, so he knew who I was, and they could say, okay, this is the guy that did the expansion draft. It was very fortuitous. And then knowing Kelly and his philosophies and his professionalism just made it, because it has to work both sides, right? They have to want me. I have to want to work somewhere that I feel comfortable. And knowing Kelly the way I do, it was a no-brainer that you'd take that plunge and go work for a team and work in the United States, which was something I'd never done.
And not just to go work for a team, Daren, but you go and you work for a team that has already set a precedent for creating some very creative, original content. And talk about like your studio, what you guys had produced now, where you guys get to work out of, and just talk about the level of commitment that they've given you guys to go ahead and just do your jobs with this.
Well, I'll tell you a story. We went on the air and did some exhibition games. Well, they did all the exhibition games. I did the last two. And then we started the season, and I hadn't done a game in a year. I'd done some OHL broadcasts, some radio broadcasts in the time I was off, but hadn't done the full National Hockey League pregame show and intermission and postgame show. So we did probably 5 or 10 games in around there, and had a meeting with Eric, and he was great because he said to me, like, it's great, we love what you're doing, but hey, it's Vegas, so like have some fun, stretch it, do some different things if you want, and that kind of opened my eyes, because I was playing it very safe. I was playing it very traditional, what I'd done on the national level, where you keep it very nuts and bolts and tell your stories through information and not necessarily entertainment. So that loosened the reins a little bit and gave me a bit more of a green light, and that was fun. And then the studio, as you mentioned, which is located at the practice facility at the team's head offices at City National Arena, that was already in the works. And that when we discussed moving down here, that was being constructed. And it wasn't ready for the start of the season, so we still had to fly. Whether it was Mike McKenna or Darren Elliott, we flew to Denver and did our road games when the team was on the road out of our AT&T Sportsnet studios in Denver. And then when the team was at home, we did it out of T-Mobile. So that was really unique and different. But the studio that we have and the set that they designed and the abilities that we have, I'll tell you right off the bat, like it's the envy of if not 30 National Hockey League clubs, then I challenge you to go find somebody that has an equal setup that we have with the professional, the look that would rival a national network, and the ability to produce content out of there, whether it's player interviews or trade deadline shows or name unveiling like we did with the Henderson Silver Knights a month and a half ago. It gives you so much freedom and so much potential to produce content that it's amazing. And we did 4 road games out of that studio before the pause, which was fun, but a little disappointing that we didn't get to do more. And we'll do games out of there when the resume to play happens.
Was it probably is that the best part of going from a national corporation like Rogers, where you probably have a set of guidelines and steps? This is how you have to do your show, and this is a line you can't cross, and whatever. To go to a team and a management crew like Eric and those guys to say, hey, you know what? Have some fun, loosen it up a little bit, maybe stray away from the traditional. Is that the biggest difference from what you were doing to what you are doing?
Yeah, I would liken it more to the Hockey Central at Noon approach, where you had a bit of wiggle room when we did the radio show on Rogers and the NHL Network with Nick Kyprios and Doug McLean and John Shannon. When we did that show, there was a lot more opportunity to show your personality than on Wednesday Night Hockey or our Maple Leaf regional games, which I did. Those were very traditional. I will say the Golden Knights, and this was before I arrived in Vegas and now, do an incredible job of walking what is a very fine line between being traditional and observing the traditions of the game and being Vegas and being, although I'm told I say Vegas strangely with a weird inflection here, and I'm working on it for the locals in Nevada. There's and being entertaining and being different. It's difficult to find that space where you're because teams have tried or people have tried and they end up making or perceived to be making a mockery of the game or not taking it seriously enough. And that's probably the hardest thing that you have to judge on a day-to-day basis when you're on the air. For me, is making sure that you're having fun, you're doing something different, but you're also being very conscious and paying attention to the traditions of what is a broadcast supposed to look like.
Going back to your Brandon, you know what? Actually, before we get into that, I want to go. What's your Bernie parent story?
Oh yes, thank you for reminding me of that.
Yeah.
So I'm backstage at the NHL Awards. It's between one of our segments of player announcements for the expansion draft, and I feel this tap on my shoulder, and so that's where the presenters would come, and then they would go out and present the Norris Trophy or the Vezina Trophy or whatever. And this tap on my shoulder, I turn around and it's Bernie Perron. Well, I was a Flyers fan in the '70s. That was my team. I was a front runner. My brother was a Montreal fan, so we kind of had the decade covered. I turn around, and there's Bernie. I'm like, wow, this is, and he's like, what is this? He doesn't know who I am. He's looking for he's looking to have a question answered. He's like, what is this craps? I'm like, what? And he's still got a thick French accent. Craps, this word craps. I can't go up there and say crap in front of all those people. I'm like, well, let me look at the script. And it was a playoff of the craps table at the casino. I said, well, Bernie, it's a gambling term. You're not saying crap, you're saying craps. Trust me, nobody's going to think you're making fun of something else. It's absolutely part of the script. He's like, I can't say craps, and So we go back I don't know what he's going to say, but I'm like thinking the whole way along, I have this conversation with Bernie Perron. He takes a couple of steps away, and I thought, screw this. And I went and grabbed him and tapped him on the shoulder. I said, do you mind? And I did a little selfie with him, and I have that picture up in my office. And it was one of those cool moments where I'm like, what? First of all, who gets to meet these types of players? Secondly, he's asking me this random goofy question. And thirdly, I decided maybe earlier in my career, I would have been too cool for school. And it's one of those things where you're like, you learn after a while that maybe you should take more advantage of opportunities. Not fanboy, but Bernie's a Hall of Famer, so I got that picture, and that's pretty cool. The picture's cool, but the story to go with it was just bizarre and funny.
Yeah, you might not have a more random encounter with somebody that you idolized, but is there anybody else along the way now? Because, I mean, obviously you're around a lot of the players. Is there somebody that you still get a little bit starstruck when you do get to interact with them in the last little while?
Well, I will say that I don't know whether it still occupies this place in his mind, but the most embarrassing moment or biggest blooper of Sidney Crosby's career, I was directly involved with, maybe responsible for. And this was when he was with, and I love Sid, he's awesome. But I saw this quote somewhere, and I've never been able to find it again. But when he was with Rimouski in the Memorial Cup in London, they played, I don't know whether it was the semifinal game or one of the round robin games. And I was hosting that tournament, and we were interviewing Sid after the game, but we had to wait for the 3 stars. So I had Sid there, and he wasn't a star, but I said, I need you for this interview. He's like, okay. I said, but after the 3 stars. So they did the they did the 3rd star, the 2nd star, and he's standing there. So they said, and the 1st star of the game, and he skates out there, and it's one of his teammates on the other side coming out of the other tunnel. It wasn't even him. And they're looking at each other, and then Sid has to turn around and come back to me. He's like, what? I said, I never said you were a star. And now, I mean, this is like lockout, and he's going to be first over. Like he was the man, like the world of hockey. And then he started laughing, and I started laughing. And we've never talked about it, but I did see the quote where he said the most embarrassing moment was when he went out for the 3 stars, and he wasn't one of the stars in the Memorial Cup in London. So at some point, I want to chat with him about it. I saw him when he came through, but I didn't get a chance to talk to him. He was hooking up with Marc-Andre Fleury and catching up, so he's got more weight with Sid than I do. But there's one for the book that I'll never forget. And boy, your heart just sinks. And I was trying to grab him because I could see what was happening. I'm like, this is not going to turn out well.
Well, I told this story last week. We had Rod Peterson on, and you had mentioned earlier, you pointed out my Melfort jersey and CJVR radio. And of course, a lot of us small town broadcasters remember names. And I remember Neil Shuchuk, who you had mentioned. He was the sports director up there forever.
He was my boss.
He was a great guy. He took me to he was at a Huskies Dogs breakfast or some football event. And as a kid growing up, we got the NFL network on our Star Choice satellite, and I was hooked. And I watched all the football lives, and I was big into the NFL. And I remember Warren Moon was the guest speaker. And Warren Moon walked up to Neil and I, and he had known Neil from, radio interviews in the past or whatever. And Warren Moon reached out his hand and said, "Hi, I'm Warren Moon. Nice to meet you." And I just stared at him thinking, I know who you are. You don't have to tell me. You're Warren Moon. And I was just my first year in radio. This was like 6 months into my first job out of college, and I don't think I could string 2 words together. I think I just shook his hand all awkwardly, probably like a wet fish, and that was just embarrassing. But
so here's one for you. I'll raise your CJVR story, because who can have like competing Melfort CJVR radio stories?
Maybe Brian Munns. We had a couple last week.
Yeah, that's true. So my internship out of college was at CJVR. My dad dropped me off, and I was staying with one of the sports guys, not Neil, but Bob Krawchuk. And Neil Billinger was our ag guy, and then there's another guy there in this townhome. And I got dropped off on a Sunday, and Bob Krawchuk was doing a hockey game that night between the Nipawin Hawks and the Flin Flon Bombers. And he knew that I had played a little bit of hockey. And he said, do you want to come? You got nothing else to do. And I'm like, yeah, sure. So we hopped in the car. We went to Nipawin. And there's no pregame show or anything like that. It's just you hop on the air, you do it. And the first time that I get to talk, I say, and the so-and-so gets but instead of saying puck, I say the other word that starts with an F. And Bob looks at me, and I'll remember this clear as day, and just is stunned. And I go into like hyperdrive. And I must have said puck 20 times in the next 30 seconds, trying to stammer my way through to try and cover up the fact that I just dropped one of the worst things that you can say on the air. And Bob is laughing. He can barely control himself. We go to commercial break, the first commercial break that we have, and the operator comes on the phone or the headset with us, and is like, okay, 2 minutes. Bob. Bob's like, yeah. Did the new guy just say on the air? Bob's like, yeah, he did. I thought I was done. That was the first sentence of my actual career. I'd done some stuff with Rick Bilbo, and he was nice enough to let me tag along with him a couple of times and done some other broadcasts. But at first, like out of college job interning, oh my goodness, what a dummy I was.
But that place, let's go through the list here, because that place, CJVR, CK750, Martine Guyard.
Yeah.
She worked there. Of course, she ended up on Sportsnet, still does some work there. You were there, Brian Munns. There's been a long list of professionals that have gone through that. And sometimes it's the smallest little stations that tee it up. And that takes me to the picture that the team, the Brandon Wheat Kings, tweeted earlier today. I may have had something to do with it, but it was the program picture of you and Darren Dreger from, I think, 92 or 93.
Not go away.
Yeah. Jason Greger from TSN 1260 said it looks like you were auditioning for Flock of Seagulls with that hairdo. Who do you remember?
How could it ever
CKLQ?
go away, honestly? With those looks, it could never go away.
Keep in mind, like, I thought that looked good enough to take a picture to put in a hockey program.
That was your headshot. That was your professional headshot.
That was some big hair. My wife always jokes that when we met, I was the one that owned the blow dryer and did all that stuff, and not her. But yeah, I don't know how that. Nadi brings that out all the time, just for our lives, like and throws it around the office. It's a bad picture, but I will say it was an impressive head of hair. Like Dreger is good. Dreger's good, but I killed him in the hair game back then, and probably still do now.
Who do you remember from CKLQ back then? Because I know that when we were on with Darren, he mentioned Leanne Doty. He remembers her. She's still around and still on air. What are some other names from your Brandon radio days that you remember?
Bill Turner, John Armstrong, then Cochran. Trying to go through the
Steve Antea
Steve Antea for sure. Driving around in that little convertible of his too. Yeah. We had a lean, mean machine. It was great. But John Armstrong was the news director and was really my official boss. But Dreger was the guy that took me under his wing and handled it, and all the golf that we would play. And Bill Turner was amazing at just mentoring me and making just little comments during sportscasts, or he'd listen to a broadcast and something to do, or how to slow it down, or enunciate it a different way. And he was amazing. And it was also a thrill because I grew up on Bill Turner. Listening, and my parents were. That was the radio station we always listened to. So being able to work with him was amazing. But you do Bill Turner, then Antea, and then Leanne, and go through the list of the daytime and the weekend lineup on Q Country, and you do the morning sports. Go home, grab a nap, come back for the noon, go home, or go play quick 9 holes, and then come back and do the 5 o'clock and the 6 o'clock sports and the Q Country Sports Roundup. That was the day, and you did it and you loved it.
That sounds a whole lot different than the way it is these days. That would be almost nice to go back, I'm sure, for some of the newsroom guys. With the ever changing media landscape, I mean, that's why it's so different now with new media. Are you really thankful that you went through it when you did?
Yeah, I guess I think nowadays everybody has such a great head start because we all do podcasts, and when I came up recording on your cassette and doing things on your own, you were kind of looked at like, well, isn't that special that he's trying that, little Daren's doing that. Like it wasn't really highly acclaimed. Now we all do podcasts like this, and we get so many reps. Or if you're in high school, you have podcasts, and you can get all these different experiences and talking to people. So I think it's really cool the way the opportunities open up now. Then you were a lot less exposure, but you did if you got your foot in the door, like I did in Brandon and in Yorkton, which was my first actual Portage la Prairie, and then Yorkton paid jobs where you did everything. Where I did funeral announcements, I did grain prices, I did cattle prices or the livestock prices, those kind of things, and you had to they would phone in. Eric Stanzlight would phone in and record his weather thing, and you'd have to do. So you did everything, and you got exposure. I mean, you didn't want to screw up a funeral announcement ever. That's really bad, and especially in Yorkton when you've got the Ukrainian heritage and the names there. That was that taught you how to roll some words, and you certainly. I mean, I'll never forget being buzzed in by Leanne, like, slow down, during my grain prices that I would read every now and then, because I would go too fast and people just couldn't keep up with writing down the grain prices, which are key in Westman. So you learn different tricks of the trade that had nothing to do with a forecheck or a breakout or calling a hockey game or a curling broadcast. That helped you along the way. As interesting as it is, it all kind of made this big stew of broadcast experiences.
I remember I was doing weekends at CKLQ, Weekend News. Bruce Lupke, a longtime voice of the Wheat Kings, was still the sports director, and
Phil took over from me.
Yeah, so it went from you to Bruce, and then Bruce to me. So that there's only been three guys in that amount of time. It's certainly been a real good stretch of time and consistency. I had said to Bruce, I was doing weekends, kind of just doing the morning run on Saturdays and Sundays while going to ACC for broadcasting, and the job opportunity had come up in Melfort, and I had said to Bruce, what do I do here? Like, I don't really want to leave home. I'm from Boissevain, and I kind of want to take your job someday, Bruce. And he said, if you want my job someday, you'll go to Melfort, you'll put in 5-6 good years, you'll do a little bit of everything, and you'll be a lot more prepared when an opportunity in the Western League, whether it's mine or somewhere else, comes up. And at the time I thought, he just wants me out of here. Like, yeah, get out of here, kid. Go and leave me alone and quit asking me questions. And you know what? The first week I was in Melfort, they helicoptered me in on part of this flood coverage up at Red Earth Cree Nation. And I was basically, me and CBC National and Global National were hanging out of this military helicopter covering the flooding. And I thought to myself, man, if Bruce had never told me to get out of here, I'd never be riding in a helicopter and checking this out. And I thought, you know what, it's never going to maybe pay off when it comes to hockey, but this is a cool experience. And then, you touched on the grain stuff. And I remember doing the Nipawin Pike Fest report. I don't know if you remember the Pike Fest.
I never got to do that one.
They would call in, and the city manager would list off the biggest fish that were caught that week, the measurements, and who caught them. And you had to record it and then write them all down and put it on the air. And I remember writing like John Smith, 41-inch pike, Dallas Jones, 43-inch pike, and thinking this is the stupidest thing in the world. But in other job interviews I've had since, it certainly has paid off.
But you're on the air and
Yeah.
you're announcing, so it didn't really matter what you were announcing as long as you were on the air and you got to go through the process of being nervous and getting yourself ready and delivering and trying to do it as flawlessly as possible.
And what were you saying, Chris? You did was it chuck wagons that you had done, Chris?
Sorry, one second. I'm just writing down here a list of good ideas. Pike Fest. I don't think that was a bad idea. I like that. We're gonna bring that to Brandon. I just want to go fishing
but you're a
more,
big
maybe.
fisherman. Yeah.
I don't care. I love that. Yeah, you know, when you're broadcasting, you got to do a little bit of everything. When I was in Olds for 5 years, and I was the voice of the pony chuck wagons in Central Alberta. So we would do the tour, and I would do the Olds, Sundre, Red Deer, Ponoka, and
I interviewed in Olds.
Did you really?
That's funny. Yeah.
For
the radio station there.
Oh,
at the radio station there.
I'm glad you didn't get it. I'm glad you ended up in Brandon.
Yeah. Chuck wagon races and rodeo was that's awesome.
And like I had no previous experience, and it was literally I was thrown into it. And actually, the guy, so his name is Tom Sawyer, which I always loved because being a Rush fan. So I created a custom intro where it was them singing Tom Sawyer before I would throw him to like do the actual call. So I would do the color, do the recap of what the times were, throw to him, and he was the actual track announcer who would do it. One of the nicest guys I've ever met.
How much time was there between races?
Not more than probably a minute and a half. 2 minutes.
You'd have to be busy to recap and then set up the lineup for teams that were going for the next race.
It was a lot. And as you know, and of course, as you know, as the years go on, all of a sudden by like year 3, I knew 3/4 of the drivers. I knew their backstories.
No. You were drinking with 3/4 of the drivers.
Well,
after the races are over.
As I said, I got to know the drivers. Yeah. So over the years, just some good old country boys. I mean, yeah, like we're at the track, at the stables. But by year 3, you're telling these stories, and all of a sudden, it became like I was actually invested in it and a lot more, and it wasn't some like outsider sport. I actually got into it. But
that's the way I was with curling, and got invested. And
Resby Coots.
Resby was my roommate in the Briar in Ottawa, 1993. But yeah, it was curling. If in Brandon, if you can cover curling and hockey in Brandon, you can cover anything anywhere. With the amount of scrutiny that's on those two sports.
Yeah, I was telling Chris last week that I picked up a part-time job at the Verdon Golf Course here just to keep myself busy during this whole pandemic, and we'll get.
He wants to golf
pandemic.
For free. He just wants to golf for free. Yeah, he's found a loophole
too, but
I don't mind that at all.
And you know what? The tips are great. I work ladies' night, and it's fantastic. They got me and another guy. We ride around on the beer cart, and it's fantastic. But I was saying, you touched on the critics in Brandon for the curling and whatever. I mentioned to you maybe off air that I had done the public address for the senior Southwest Baseball League the other night. While in for coffee the next morning, boy, did I hear it. I haven't been on the radio since March 7th, and I screwed up a couple of names and just having fun with it. And the little old ladies, they knew and they remembered and they made sure to tell me. So I know what you're saying about the curling. Westman, it's harsh. You got some harsh critics. If you screw something up, you're going to hear about it.
You don't need a message board or Twitter. Or they'll just come and find you and
go to the coffee shop in the morning.
Hey, I remember when you joined Q Country, my dad, this is how interconnected everything is, that my dad saying the new guy is from Boys of Ain, and he's a cousin or a nephew of Ken Crowe. What's the relation there with Kenny?
Well, that one is, I can't remember off the top of my head, but yeah, it's something with my grandpa and his brother. It's more of my dad's relative as opposed to mine, but somewhere down the line, yeah.
Yeah, so he was very happy to be able to fill me in that the new guy was a fellow Westman product and had a relationship with Ken Crowe, who's a goalie, ran goalie schools and the like around Brandon. I'm not even sure where Kenny is these days, but
he coached the ACC women's team with Larry Shannon for a couple of years. But
that would be a bad combo, those two together. Oh my goodness!
I think he retired.
Guys.
Yeah, I think he retired after a couple of years. Although Larry's still going. Although he's got a couple of assistants help him out. Larry actually coached me when I played at ACC.
When you see Larry, Give him a big hug for me. He's that's awesome. That's outstanding. There's a name from the past.
Well, let's get back to kind of the main focus of why we wanted to have you on, aside from the Wheat King talk. A big news today, I'm sure you've been following along because it certainly affects your immediate future. Bob McKenzie and other hockey reporters kind of laying out the facts and the points of interest for the NHL's return to play. I mean, it's a pretty broad question, but what are your general thoughts on everything that's going on?
So for people that are listening,
let's open up Bob McKenzie's stuff here. So 23 minutes ago,
this is also the greatest thing about working for a team and not the national network anymore is I know about this information, but I can talk to people, my connections, and they know I'm not just hunting for news because we're not really newsbreakers. We're broadcasters for the team now. So it's I find people are a lot friendlier to me and more forthcoming now.
So basically, just he's going through the list, talking about the finalization of the tentative agreement for the return to play and how it's going to play out. If for example inside the bubble, a player tests positive. They've talked about how for a maximum of 5 weeks, the players could be in their bubble without their families. But for the conference final and the Stanley Cup, their families would be allowed in. Players, staff will not be allowed to leave. They must wear masks. Inside facilities, coaches won't need masks on the bench. Players won't need it when skating or working out. If a player has to leave the bubble for whatever reason, he has to come back and quarantine for 4 days and do X number of tests until they're back negative based on where he had gone. They talk about in this, obviously Frank Saravelli, tweeting it from TSN as well. They talk about how they would handle staff, officials, hotel security, food service staff, buses, and everything that's going on with it. It's quite the lengthy list, but certainly thorough would be a great word to say. I mean, we could be here for an hour.
I'll give you an idea of how thorough is and has been. A conversation that I had with somebody was, how do you, if you go to video review, and this conversation took place probably a month ago, but the conversation that they were having is if you went to video review, how does the referee or the linesman use that headset, and what do they do with that headset? Because somebody else can't use that headset because you can't have the crossover. Now, I don't know whether things have relaxed on this or they just disinfected the headset or are going to disinfect the headset, but those kind of conversations about went down to those little details or seemingly little details all the way along. So it's quite onerous, the process of getting this return to play ready to go.
The latest tweet from Frank Saravelli says, between periods during games, the bench area, including the flooring, bench surface, dasher board, water bottle areas, and all the glass will be disinfected.
That should happen anyway.
It should happen anyway.
Like in every league that we've ever played in, the bench area is just gross anyway. So
yeah,
this is a real good progress.
If you're playing rec on a Monday night at the Oak Lake Arena, you can bet that your empty Coors can from the week before is still sitting exactly where you left it.
Exactly. So I think that may be the biggest bit of progress that's going to come out of this is the disinfecting the period, the benches between periods. And you mentioned the coaches don't have to wear masks on the bench.
Right.
Okay. Do any of them wear masks on the bench instead of holding up the lineup cards so we can't read their lips?
That's a good thought.
I'll talk to Pete DeBoer about that. I'm going to sit down with him in the next few days for some content for our games when we get back playing. I'm going to actually ask him that, and I'll try and find the clip and send it to you because of it was inspired from this podcast. But I wonder, because so many guys hold up the lineup card so we can't read their lips. Just wear the mask now.
I can't imagine. Could you imagine an ornery guy like, even Mike Keenan, or a guy like an angry Lindy Ruff throwing a mask on, or, one of those old school coaches that just got all owly about everything. Pat Burns, Pat Quinn. Could you imagine them being told that they had to put a mask on? How would Pat Quinn smoke his cigar between periods if he had a mask on?
Well, he's chomping that gum, right? that was Pat Quinn. What I remember about him in the Toronto days, he just tore through those. In fact, he got a commercial out of it with the gum manufacturer. So yeah, you're right about that. And Iron Mike, him whacking that stick and doing all that, that would be interesting.
Do you think this is, I mean, it's probably a political answer, but do you think it's going to work? Do you think the NHL will be able to complete the playoffs? Yeah.
In fact, I've said over and over to my colleagues, the people that I hang out with and in communication with, that the safest place will be a bubble. Like, is it going to be perfect? No, nothing's going to be foolproof. It's not possible. But you can't tell me with the extent of precautions and processes that they're putting in place that bubble isn't going to be as safe as anywhere that you can be. Certainly safer than what I go through on a daily routine or you go through on your daily routine. My exposure is a little bit higher because of where I live, but I think I certainly think it's going to work, and I give them all the credit in the world. I mean, the adjustment that they made from Vancouver and Vegas to Edmonton and Toronto shows that they were leaving themselves flexibility, and the National Hockey League has executed to this point as well as or better than what I've seen from the controversy surrounding the NBA and Major League Baseball. And we can't talk about the National Football League yet, but I've been really impressed with the leadership and what they've done from Hockey Ops and the Deputy Commissioner Bill Daly and the Commissioner Gary Bettman.
Before we wrap things up, Daren, we got to be talking about...
We're done because I like this trip down memory lane with all these names that were thrown out.
I was not
Pete
doing the
Gerlinger.
goodbye.
Pete Gerlinger is awesome.
I was not doing the goodbye, but just before we even get close to that, I want us to put at least some time to talk about the chirp, talk about what's going on.
Yeah, it's been fun. That's one of the things that I wanted to do a podcast when I worked at Sportsnet, but we weren't allowed to do them at the time. That's not a shot or a criticism of anybody at all. I love the people that I work with, and I love my bosses. The people that are still there are amazing. But it didn't fit under the umbrella. You had your 31 Thoughts podcast and different things. So when I left Sportsnet, one of my first things that I did was try to organize and put together a podcast. It's a lot more work than I thought it was. There's a lot more responsibility with it between the recording process and making sure your levels are good. And I had some real mistakes along the way as you learn. I'm a commentator, aka Poodle, so I didn't know the whole everything that went in. I just grabbed a mic and talked. So it's been a real learning experience, and it's something that it's been one of the most gratifying and proudest things that I've done in my career, because there's been nobody else. It's been my family and me that have kind of really led to it with some real guidance along the way from some mentors, and it's been awesome. I'll be honest, I started it to talk to my friends and my buddies. It evolved a little bit from that to getting into some different interviews, but the foundation of it will always be talking to friends around hockey or around sports. There's like Peter Mansbridge allowed me to speak to him. Connected with him in December, and we spent 45 minutes on the phone, and that was really cool. But the hockey people have been so generous with their time with me. It's been a blast. I wanted to name it Pigeon Talk or You Pigeon, but the guy George Arabian from the company that designed the logo, he said, I don't even. we played rec hockey together, men's league hockey. I play men's league hockey. I've never heard of people being called pigeons. We're not naming it that. So he changed it to the chirp, and it's one of those ones where I'm really glad I had smart people around me, because the chirp is much better name, and it's a cool logo.
So
it's fun.
Going back before even the chirp, so after you left Sportsnet, some of your first podcast things, I know you're doing some stuff with Dean Blundell. Now, when I was going back to also my days and olds, I was doing the morning show on the rock station there, and every day I'd be listening to the podcast of the Dean Blundell show with him and Todd on the Edge. How did you meet Dean, and how did that connection? Because that's two guys that I never would have thought about putting in my head together like that.
Yeah, you're right.
Like I've fans separately, and all of a sudden it was like you guys were together. I was like, how did that combination come?
Well, we both had some time on our hands. That's first and foremost, and we lived a couple of blocks away from each other in Markham. And we literally did it, the podcasting around his kitchen table, and he's a really talented broadcaster.
Did you guys just like meet in the Toronto circles though? Like, how did that come about?
Yeah, he was in Toronto, and then he worked at Sportsnet doing the Sportsnet 590 morning show. So knew him a little bit, but he lived in Markham, so I actually got to know him more because we lived in the same neighborhood and would see each other at rinks or the Ball Diamond or the grocery store, that kind of thing, than I would being on when he hosted the morning show on 590 The Fan. So we developed a relationship then, and yeah, I love doing the podcast with Dean, because I got to talk about things other than sports and show some range. And he's super talented. He's awesome. I can't wait for Dean to be back on the air, and I think he's come a long way and shown great growth in learning from like we all have from different missteps. And I think the world's going to be, and broadcasting in general is going to be much better when he's back in the air, because he's a funny dude.
Well, we always do a little rapid fire
I will say
segment.
This. There has been times where I've said, Dean, you can't say that, or Dean, we're not talking. We're not talking about that, because
it was probably good to have you there to maybe keep on the straight and narrow.
But he also brought me out a little bit too. It wasn't just me pulling the reins in and shutting him down. I did and went different places with our conversations that I never would have done. So I give him great credit there. It's fun, and I hope to do more stuff with him.
Well, I was saying we usually wrap up our guests with a little rapid fire segment and hit you with some quick questions to discuss life, favorites, things you like, things you don't like.
Love this.
My first one, what was your number one? Dreger was not happy with. Was he the one that didn't like Tiger King, or was it Ray Ferraro that said Tiger King was a complete waste of time?
Ferraro doesn't like anything.
One of them was really grumpy about Tiger King.
It had to be Ray. It was Ray. Ray. Yeah.
Yeah. Guarantee. I don't even need to listen to that one. I know that was Ray.
But that
complete waste of time, I think, is what he said.
Yeah.
What was your COVID binge?
Ray, I was in Verdun, coming back from Verdun. Speaking of where you're working, helping out there with the golf course, coming back from Verdun when Ray set the record. So we played, I don't know what game it was, Bantam or whatever, listening to the radio. And when Ray set the record for most goals scored in the Western Hockey League, and I still think it's cool that I get to classify him as a friend and be able to work with him. My COVID binge was definitely Tiger King. My wife and I went through that like just nothing else we've ever watched. We went through it, and it became more bizarre. And Carol Baskin has become this just like
internet sensation.
No, it's become like an anthem to us. This motto or this phrase. Like every now and then, we're like Carol Baskin or something. Like this random reference has become part of our. Be part of our culture. So definitely that. And I did go back and watch West Wing. I went back and watched that series because that was a great series back in the day, and I never would have got a chance to watch that again.
Before I get into mine, still have not watched Tiger King as a follow-up because on multiple people's suggestion, just to not waste my time on it. I don't know.
No, it's good. No, it's
fantastic
good.
entertainment.
You see,
I tell you, it is fascinating. And then they're doing a spin-off, or they're doing a second season of it, or something like that. And when they do find Carol's ex-husband, wherever he is, whether she's involved or not, there'll be another chapter there. So it's you need to watch it, because it's a credit to documentary filmmaking, not in its most traditional sense, but wow.
I think,
and the guy from the reporter guy, the producer, the
guy with the cowboy hat.
Yeah,
right he just smoking and drinking.
Characters.
I think I've already got the most of it. Carol Baskin definitely fed her husband to tigers. I don't need to watch a single thing. I've already learned that. And I know I don't have to watch a single episode to share the meme, I will never financially recover from this. I have sent that to people after I make any purchase now. I think that's one of the funniest things to do. I absolutely love that one. All right. Rapid fire, favorite NHL city to visit?
New York City. I always wanted to go there as a kid. Spent my 30th birthday there by myself. I don't know what I was covering, but I just happened to be in New York City in the summer of that year, and I got to do some cool things there. When Eric Lindros signed, I was there shortly after 9/11 and got to see the emotion of that. I was there during Stanley Cup Final. Going for runs in Central Park, which is cool. I'm a real big fan of New York City, and nobody get mad at me about any other National Hockey League cities. But yeah, New York City is beautiful and wonderful, and I love it.
All right, you're sitting down for a meal at the new restaurant. I can't think of the name of it, but owned by William Carlson and his crew of guys, the Steakhouse.
Players Lounge.
A Players Lounge. Okay, so you guys are sitting down for a meal there, your whole broadcast crew. You, Gary, Stormy. The whole crew, Gary, Shane, Dave, yep. Stormy. Who's the last person to reach for the bill when it comes to the table? Dave Gosher. All right.
I don't even know this because I'm not on the road with him all the time. But Shane, I just hear Shane say all the time, Gosher's the cheapest guy. He's the cheapest guy.
I was hoping you were going to throw Gary Lawless under the bus, but
no, Gary's actually pretty generous. I will give him. There's a lot of things I can say about Gary, but cheap is not one of them. He's really good at that, which means he's making a lot of money, which is a good thing too, and has taken care of his money. And Stormy is our Rinkside reporter and host, and she is a star waiting to just explode onto the scene. For those that don't watch our broadcast, she is amazing.
I'm just trying to think of her right now, actually, before I ask my question.
Stormy Buonantony. You don't know how many, aside from going on the air, and there's one other name that I practiced over and over and over again. It was the first Gulf War. I was working at GX94 in Yorkton, and General Jean de Chastelain, or John, whatever, but it was de Chastelain was the last name. And I practiced that over and over again, trying to get that right. And then Stormy Buonantony. Buonantony is the other one when I first went on the air, because I didn't want to screw up my new coworker's name the first time. Mike McKenna was fine. Darren Elliott was good. Shane Hannity, that one I'd been through before.
Is there a news story that you remember going on the air with, or breaking, or tweeting for that matter, that at the time you were just kind of stunned by it, shocked by it? I'm sure there's been a number of stories over the year that you've been involved with getting the word out there, but is there one that you remember in particular?
That's a good question. Means I'm old. That I'm trying to think about it.
Well, you were reporting before Twitter was even a thought.
Yeah, and sadly that is very true.
And that's what I go to is, people will, back in the day, and again, even myself at my age, I joke about it on my show sometimes. I still search out the top of the hour news because I want to know what's going on. What that is, right? So it's not always being connected with the phones. And going back in the day, the radio news guy broke the news to everyone, especially back when you were doing what you were doing. So yeah, I just wonder if there was one that kind of popped in your mind that you remember when it kind of came into the newsroom or something happened. You're like, man, I can't believe we're about to go on the air and say this.
Well, it wasn't when the Melville City Council voted to approve the ship in a bottle expenditure at City Council that I was working at one time when I was at
Well, you
TX94.
just brought it up, so I don't know if that's then...
It's stuck in your memory.
It had stuck in my memory. Well, you know what? I went back and asked our ag guy.
Impact.
This is the second reference to an agriculture reporter that we had. We had one in Neil Billinger in Melfort, and we had one at GX94, and Jack Dawes was his name. And I came back with the agenda for City Council, and he's like, I said, I don't know what to report on this. He goes, are you kidding? There's a ship in a bottle. They've approved the spending and making for the city of Melville. Do something on that. So I did a voiceover on the city of Melville approving the expenditure of creating a ship in a bottle. Far off topic, but getting back to it, probably one of the Lindros stories. I got to be close with Eric for a period of time when he was sitting out with the Philadelphia Flyers. So doing things like that and that reporting, and also trying to balance my relationship with him at that period, and then getting the news out there. So there's and everybody was following that, and then he subsequently eventually signed with the New York Rangers, and then joined the Toronto Maple Leafs. So those were two big stories that I was able to follow at the time, and doing the expansion draft for the Golden Knights. I was amazed at how late we got the names. Like, we did a couple of rehearsals for that show, Catherine and I, at T-Mobile Arena, with fake names, just made up stuff. Literally made up stuff that we were just doing run-throughs to make sure that the videos and things matched. But I was surprised at how late we got the names. Draft lotteries. I was in the back room the night that Austin Matthews, or that the Toronto Maple Leafs won the first overall pick, and I had that information right as it came out of the ping pong room, the sequestered room. So I was one of 30 people in the world that knew for 20 minutes that the Toronto Maple Leafs had won that draft lottery. That was, and the Winnipeg Jets had jumped up. I knew that that was going to be significant for Kevin Cheveldayoff and that group. That was a pretty cool moment, knowing how elite of a group and closed off group that was.
My last one. Okay, so you're leaving the Keystone after a Friday night game between the Wheat Kings and the Prince Albert Raiders. Where's your watering hole / restaurant back in the early 90s? Where were you going for a post-game bite to eat?
Like straight to Houston. Not even a bite to eat. There was no eating. No eating. Oh, you know what, though? I will say this, the Keg, too. If it was a Friday night, the Keg. But on a Saturday, it probably would have been Houston's. Friday night was what did they have there? Mega nights. That was
long before my time. I was born in '91, Daren. So
trust me, it wasn't pretty megas. But we used to do a pregame show. Dregs and I would do a pregame show. We did it from Thunderbird Bowl, and we did it at times from the Keg Lounge. And my parents would come to both the Thunderbird Bowl and the Keg, and watch their son do the pregame show, which was always very, very cool. My dad remains to this day my biggest supporter, and he's so cool. Perry did that article. Longest art. Like, I mean, I don't have to write a book now because Perry did that in the Random Sun the other day, and my dad could not be like, he phoned me 3 straight days. We talked 3 straight days and about it. It was cool. But the Keg on a Friday night and any other day, Houston's. Now they're both still there.
Yep.
Good.
So you're good. Although I can't tell you the last time I went to Houston's. My wife's in the house, so I better not say anything either. But
I can't tell you the last time I ate after a game, though.
Yeah.
Well, you're parched. You guys know this. You're parched after a broadcast.
Yeah. You got to get yourself. We got a mini fridge up in the press box.
You know
it hasn't worked for like a season and a half though.
Yeah, we gotta get that fixed.
It's like barely cool.
We didn't have a bulletin board. We just tacked it straight into the gyprock. It was pretty basic. And you know what? When I joined Q Country, we got the radio rights for the first time. They'd always been at CKX. So it was a massive deal, and doing those games is still such a thrill to be able to say that I worked Brandon Wheat King games, and like Darren Ritchie was a player then. That's how long ago it was, and now he's a good buddy. But I will give all the credit in the world. That is a National Hockey League room, the way that you set up the broadcast booth in the Keystone Center, and it will always be the Keystone Center.
Yeah.
Sorry, Westman.
If anybody out there listening wants to donate a new bar fridge, we could use a new fridge. So if anybody's cleaning out their garage, we could use a new fridge up there.
Have you seen the Ring of Fame on the outside there, Darren? That has your name on it and the other broadcasters?
Yes. Yeah. It's amazing what you guys have done. It's really, really, really cool. And I'm not saying that with anything but the most positive enforcement of that. It's I give you guys all the credit in the world. It's that lineage and that history is something that I think we can all be proud of as broadcasters in Brandon and working with the Wheat Kings. I'm proud of where I'm from. I'm proud that I work there, and I can't wait for them to eventually win. When I've always told Kelly this, when they win, I will be part of a team picture somewhere. I will be in that team, some kind of team picture. I will be there.
I'm sure that you've already sent Kelly your ring size, not only for a Stanley Cup ring with Vegas, but for a Western Hockey League Memorial Cup ring as well. Millard, fan number 1 on the side of the ring.
Yes. Well, I mean, my history with the Wheat Kings goes back a long ways, but nothing would ever top a Memorial Cup win. I mean, Richie and Gil Wojcik and all those guys that are from my era, Marty Murray and Wade Redden and that group of guys. I mean, I can still text Wade Redden and would talk about Wheat King stuff. It's just it's the way it is. And then that story that I told in the Brandon Sun about Kelly being outside my house, checking up on the billet that we had because he always skipped curfew, and me going out, probably heading to Houston's, and Kelly waiting for the player to come home and break curfew. And like, Grim, hey. Good old East End Brandon. My mom used to phone, like Dregs would do an open line show, Q Country, and my mom would phone the open line show and ask Kelly questions about why our billet wasn't getting more ice time. That's how big a fan we were. And I'd be sitting in the room going, we can't really be doing this. But we did.
Awesome.
Love it, Darren. This was excellent. I know that you've been great to me in my transition into the Wheat Kings, and it's always good to hear from you. When my wife actually, long before, I mean, people always say that I'm a big Vegas fan now, but when Vegas got the team, my wife being a big hockey fan, I mean, she played college hockey. We had the NHL Game Center, and she watched that first game. She liked the logo and everything. Watched that first game after, of course, the tragedy that had happened just down the road from the rink, and that whole ceremony, everything. She was hooked. So I mean, she loves listening to Dave and Shane and you guys. The production you do, it's become a staple in our house watching Vegas games, even aside from the Brandon connection. So
well, when I get a little too traditional, make sure that she sends me a note and says, "Hey, it's Vegas. Let's go."
Yeah, if you're wearing a black suit with a white shirt and a black tie, I'll get her to send you a message and tell you to spice it up a little bit.
Yeah.
You're not flashy enough.
I'll need that little reminder every now and then. This has been fun. I'm a big fan of your podcast, you guys, and I love seeing who you're getting on every week, and it's you're working hard at it, and it's a great way to keep everybody involved and keep some ties to the past and tell some cool stories.
Well, and you mentioned Perry. I mean, he was doing a great job of keeping everybody up to date on the alumni series. I love how he's reaching out, and he did that story on you. And we were actually texting earlier today. We were joking that maybe we're starting to share one small brain here, because we kind of were talking about booking you on while he was doing that story, and now he's getting Drager for his article right after we had him on the podcast. So seems like we're all kind of spinning in these small little circles now, and we're trying to go after the same guys. But we appreciate you giving all this time, and obviously showing a lot of love for Brandon, and that's never in doubt with you. So it's always great.
I have the picture of the water tower in the East End up prominently in my hallway, and my wife laughs at me about my love for water towers, but it's right there because I grew up in the shadows of it.
Oh, that's awesome.
Episode 26 of the Weekly Harvest put into production, of course, in partnership with Q Country, Westman Communications Group, and the Brandon Wheat Kings. It'll drop wherever you get your podcasts tomorrow, Tuesday afternoon. You can get it on Apple, Spotify, Google Play, wherever you get your podcasts. You can also watch it on WCG TV. Check your local listings on the guide. And you can also get it at qcountryfm.ca. So thanks for listening this week. And we'll keep you informed of who's jumping on next week.
Be sure to follow Q Country and the Wheat Kings on Twitter and Facebook for all your Brandon Wheat Kings news. Thanks for listening to the Weekly Harvest.